Hey guys, and welcome to Petrol, and welcome to a slightly different type of video. A couple of weeks ago in one of my midweek 180s, I asked you guys, what would you do to improve Formula One? It was, if you like, the following week after the Formula One season finished, and I had loads of great suggestions. So many that I thought it might be worth just having a bit of a chat around what you and I think might improve Formula One, and that's what this vlog's all about. So I've broken the video down into a number of sections, each section looking at a possible thing that we could do to improve Formula One. So let's start with the first possibility.
Suggestion number 1, stay the same.
Okay, so the suggestion is we stay the same, we don't do anything. There was a big regulation change coming into 2017. The cars changed hugely. They became more aggressive. The tyres allowed the drivers to push on more. They were bigger, so they had more grip, they had more aero. The cars have been all year significantly faster around the circuits, and all the drivers, they all seem to say, they're the same sort of thing. They all enjoy driving them, and the racing's been pretty spectacular. I think my problem I have with staying the same is, yes, the cars are faster, yes, they're more spectacular, yes, they look like they're more of a handful. They still have one fundamental problem, and that is there's so much aero on the cars that you just can't follow the car in front particularly well, certainly for long periods of time, and that makes overtaking quite difficult. And I know we've got things like DRS and the ability to harvest power at different times, but all in all, that kind of close quarters combat racing, that's the bit that's missing. And there have been some phenomenal overtakes this year. The real exponents of that for me would be Daniel Ricciardo, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton. They've done some amazing overtaking this year, but it's still not good enough, I don't think. So I'm not convinced doing nothing is an option, and actually that leads me into the next possibility.
Number 2, the proposed engine changes for 2021.
So the next possibility then is all about two things for me really, noise and money. And that is the proposed regulation changes around the engine. So at the moment we've got a V6 turbocharged hybrid engine, and it has two different parts of the hybrid. There's what's called the MGU-H and the MGU-K. The MGU-H is the really expensive, complex, difficult to develop bit. It's the thing that harvests the engine from the turbocharger of the car. And the regulation changes that are proposed to come in 2021, it's highly likely that that will be removed, and that should do two things. It should reduce the cost associated with that part of the engine and reduce the cost of developing engines, and that hopefully will bring new entrants in, like Aston Martin, for example, but it would be great to get some other engine manufacturers in. But then the other thing it does is that very process of harvesting energy is part of the problem around reducing the noise. So by removing the MGU-H, it's hoped that the engines will sound much, much better. And if you think back, we had turbocharged cars in the 80s and they sounded awesome. So hopefully that should sort the noise problem out. But they will still be hybrid engines. They'll still have the MGU-K, which is the bit that harvests the kinetic energy, the regenerative braking, those types of things. So they will still be hybrid type engines. That should encourage more manufacturers in, but we've still got that kind of hybrid element to it. So in my midweek 180, when I asked you guys how could we improve Formula One, the overwhelming response came back was my next suggestion.
Number 3, bring back the V10s.
So the next suggestion, massively supported by Petrol subscribers, is bring back V10 engines. Now, if you've ever heard a V10 Formula One car on full song, it is a noise to behold. And to be honest, the V8s weren't that bad either. They just sound awesome. And much as a Formula One fan as I am, I would love that to come back. I mean, they were so noisy, so loud, it almost hurt your ears. I just don't think that we'll see that. I think that Formula One, whilst it has a job to be the pinnacle of motorsport, I also think it needs to reflect the kind of, for the manufacturers to be involved, reflect the way things are going with road cars. And we see this in road cars: more use of turbocharging, more use of hybrid technology, and we need to reflect that in Formula One. And actually, if you look at the popularity of Formula E, where we're starting to see manufacturers migrate their kind of performance car motorsport budgets into Formula E, like Porsche for example, I just can't see that Formula One, much as we would all love V10 or V8 engines, I just don't think we're going to see that. Another suggestion, and this suggestion was from Humphrey Bradley, was why don't we just have it with no engine regulations whatsoever? Pretty much anything goes. And that would get some real diversity into the sport. And I think that would have to be mapped with some kind of budgetary cap. Otherwise, the more money you've got, the more that you would be able to spend, and obviously the more performance you get. Much as, again, I'd like that system, I just don't think that's going to happen. So I think the suggestions that we've got going into 2021 are good, but I actually don't think that's the problem. I'd like more noise, but I think the problem for the sport is much more fundamental than that, and that leads me to my next suggestion.
Number 4, simplify the AERO.
So Francois G and a number of other people suggested that the big problem is actually AERO. It's all about aerodynamics. And the amazing advances in Formula One aerodynamics over the last 20 years have clearly led to cars that are able to, the amount of grip that they can generate is just phenomenal. The problem with the modern aerodynamic cars, and I'm by no means an aerodynamicist, I would just like to put that out there, but I do kind of watch a lot of videos, do a lot of reading, listen to a lot of what the experts are saying. And the modern day aerodynamics are so focused around the car and removing things like the sort of aerodynamic environment around the wheels, and making sure that they take all of the kind of dirty air around the wheels, and it basically ends up coming around the car and out the back of the car, and that disturbed air behind the car means that any car following just doesn't get the aerodynamic performance from things, especially the front wing. So one of the suggestions would be to simplify the aerodynamics. And again, if you look at something like the endurance cars, LMP1 type cars, and the racing that you get there, because of the difference of their aerodynamics, they are able to follow each other far, far more closely, and therefore the racing is really, really exciting. I saw a really interesting tweet a couple of weeks ago where someone said, Formula One's biggest threat would be if the World Endurance Car or LMP1 series decided to just do 2-hour races, in which case it would effectively be like a Grand Prix with Grand Prix kind of speed cars and brilliant racing. And I think that's quite true. I mean, clearly the whole thing about endurance car racing is the races are 6 hours long or 12 hours long or 24 hours long. But I think sorting out that aerodynamics so that maybe the priority, rather than the car generating the grip, the priority is to kind of enable cars to follow. I think that would help the racing a great deal, because for me and lots of people I know who kind of, especially the people who've moved away from Formula One, the reason they move away is because the racing's not as exciting anymore, because cars can't follow each other. And if they do follow each other after a lap's time, the tyres are all overheated and they have to drop back and let things cool down. So sort out the aero, simplify it, so that cars can follow each other. That will increase the racing. We don't then need artificial aids like DRS and so on. We can just get good wheel-to-wheel racing like you get in endurance cars, like you get in touring cars. And I think that would make Formula One a real show again. Next suggestion.
Number 5, bring back mid-race refueling.
Okay, Anthony Swan and Christopher Bailey, amongst others, suggested bring back refueling. And I have to say, I really agree with this one. When we had in-race refueling, for me, it just added an extra dimension to the strategy. In qualifying, you get some people that put very little fuel in, so they get great qualifying, but then had to come in and refuel within the first few laps. or you'd get people fuel long, have a slower qualifying, but then go deeper into the race before they could, needed to refuel and do a pit stop. It meant that there was different strategies could play out. You could do a splash and dash at the end. You could undercut people. I just found that the racing strategically was far more interesting, and I understand and appreciate the reasons why refueling was banned. I know there's a safety element, but I don't think that's the major element. As far as I'm aware, the major reason why fueling was rebanned was the cost of shipping all of the various refueling rigs around the world was huge, and it cost a fortune shipping all the kit round for the teams anyway. But that just added extra cost. So the idea was to remove refueling from the equation. You don't have all of that equipment to ship around the world. But I actually think bringing back refueling would just spice things up a bit. It would just make it a little bit more. Because at the moment the problem you've got, someone qualifies really well, they've got a good race set up for the car, they get into the first position going into the first corner, and then it's almost impossible to overtake them, so it just becomes a procession. Whereas if you've got that extra strategic input, I think that would be a really great way to spice up racing. So let's have a look at maybe for me the most interesting one and perhaps the most controversial one.
Number 6, show me the money.
So for me, I've saved the best and maybe most controversial thing or suggestion till last, and that is how the money is distributed amongst the teams at the end of the season based on performance. Now, I don't know how much you know about this. I kind of assumed that it was a reasonably unfair distribution of money, and I know that towards the end of the season, when the teams are jostling for position, the commentators are always saying, one place in the rankings tables can make millions of pounds worth of difference. But I never realised just how much difference. So I found a really interesting article on Autosport. So I'm going to just quickly jump onto that, and we'll have a quick look through this, because I think you will find this fascinating.
I clearly like to credit Autosport for these numbers, but I just find them fascinating. So FOM's 2017 turnover is estimated at $1.83 billion, with underlying revenues of about $1.38 billion. And this is distributed across the 10 teams through 9 monthly payments. And this table explains how that distribution takes place. So let's just very briefly look at some of the key elements to this table. So you can see the teams down the left-hand side. Column 1 are payments based on the team's classifications over the past 3 years, with column 2 being based solely on the team's 2016 classification. But the LST column is a long-standing team agreement for Ferrari, so they get $68 million a year just for being a long-standing team, which if you look down is actually more than the bottom 4 teams get individually, which I just find absolutely stunning. So if you look at the total number, the really scary thing is that Ferrari will receive $180 million, and that's basically 1/5 of the total pot. It is less than last year, admittedly, but it's still unbelievable. And that's $108 million more than Force India receives. And then yet Force India only finished 1 place adrift in the Constructors' Championship. That cannot be fair. That cannot be sustainable. And just to give you an idea, if the pot was shared out equally, each team would get $94 million. That would leave Ferrari's payment down by $86 million. But Sauber, the final team to qualify for column 1 and 2 payments, would receive an extra $45 million for 1 year. Now, surely that's going to shake things up a little.
See, told you. That for me is sort that out. And I know the problem you're going to have is that the big teams will never ever agree to that. Ferrari certainly wouldn't agree to that. But how can you encourage new teams to come in when the distribution of wealth is so unfair? And I just find that really challenging. So, for me, if you distributed the money even to the smaller teams, they would be able to develop their cars more. They would be able to have more competitive cars, and the racing would be better. It's not rocket science, surely. Anyway, that is my ultimate suggestion. I think that should probably be in suggestion number 1. And then finally, and perhaps the most unlikely suggestion, I've left till last.
And finally, number 7, anything goes.
Now, I quite like this suggestion, but sadly, motorsport history is probably against us on this one. So the idea is each team gets very strict budgets, and basically then anything goes. There may well be some rules around maybe the kind of size of the car, so sort of basic dimensions, but anything. You could have petrol engines, you could have hybrid, you could use hydrogen fuel cells, you could do anything you like, the biggest engine you like, the most powerful engine you like, the most radical aero, and therefore you've got this real drive of technology, which F1's always wanting, and some different types of cars. What I really love about the old historic Formula One racing is there were really different types of cars. You looked at what kind of Lotus did with some of their cars, from cars with fans that suck the air out from underneath the car to make it stick to the road more, or cars with 2 chassis, one around the monocoque and one around the bodywork, or cars with 6 wheels instead of 4. And I just think it added a bit of spice. So I think that one would be good. My worry with that as a suggestion, though, is if you're into your rallying and you look back in the 1980s around Group B in rallying, that was essentially what Group B was. It was kind of, all holes barred, you go for it, boys, and make the fastest car you like. And it lasted a couple of years, unfortunately, until things just got too quick and too dangerous, and Group B was banned. So I'm not so sure that that last suggestion will ever fly, but it would be wicked, wouldn't it? It'd be fantastic to have all of these different types of cars. Anyway, that brings me to the end of this kind of chat vlog style video. I hope you've enjoyed it. This is my office, by the way, where I work and kind of do my editing and things. I've never actually filmed in here before, normally because it's too messy. But I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have done so, give me a thumbs up. I would love to hear your comments below about any of the ideas that I've put out there, just to see what you think. But yeah, put your comments below, and if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Petrol for plenty more content to come. And I will see you on the next film, guys. Anyway, you take care, drive safe.